What is it? Oh yeah, so I saw the video you sent me, but I couldn't click it because it was just too laggy, and I was focusing on the Skype thing. But we were talking about Parry. What's his name?
Parasite.
It's like the unintentional or intentional shill. Either way,
Yeah.
is 100%. Yeah, the alien thing is bollocks. I mean, we know that this is the narrative that's been set. It's everything is just theatre, and it's become so predictable for people that actually have their eyes open. Everything is the system that they created through the Bauhaus movement in the early fucking turn of the century with LGBT feminism, slicing and dividing society so everyone's bickering amongst each other for things that shouldn't really matter. And then, of course, now we're going into the era of digitalization, the complete scrappage of standardized currency, which is what they're going to do. A digital currency format intended to promote the most totalitarian measures of all time, whereby people can be essentially checked up on every single day of the week.
Absolutely.
Why everyone takes their jabs, of course, because they're fucking retarded. And the next thing is going to be the little fake alien invasion, which they've been sponsoring for ages, which is what we're seeing now on the news. Oh my God. There might be life on the moon or on Mars. There are aliens. It's the same shit that was predicted in the fucking 80s by the guy that wrote Beyond a Pale Horse, who was probably a shit as well, but he was supposedly shot outside of his house by sheriffs. He's the guy that was, I guess, the original, what they would call conspiracy theorist, i.e. an alternative historian. I've forgotten his name, but
Bill Cooper. William Cooper, but Bill Cooper. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it's just hilarious, isn't it? Just how I don't know. I think it's demoralization is the word for many people. People that actually have the capacity to utilize the few brain cells they have become so demoralized that they can't see through the facade that is totalitarianism. And then the rest of the people are just fucking high off their faces on Coca-Cola and fucking chemical-induced food products that they feed their kids from day one. I mean, everything is poison, essentially, and everything is intended to undermine any form of opposition. So, yeah, I guess that's a good intro.
Yeah, absolutely. Something funny. I saw a video today, 2 minutes long. I went to, Time the magazine, that famous magazine in America.
Time magazine, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so much bullshit on them.
I mean, surprise, surprise. I don't know why anyone would be surprised at this point, but obviously I mean that, tongue in cheek. I went to their website and there was like a embedded YouTube video from somebody speaking at the World Economic Forum. And it said something along the lines of there may not be enough food to feed the planet in 2023.
That's all intentional, though. Interestingly, I'm subscribed to a load of gardener channels on YouTube just to get a nice equilibrium. So I'm not always looking at negative stuff. I get subscriptions where people are just planting food forests and stuff, and they're like survivalists or whatever you want to call them. One guy was talking about how GMO grains now, they've created a grain. This is Monsanto, and no doubt all the other companies that are aligned to this particular field of inquiry. They've created grains that can only be used once, so they only produce one set of crops, and then they can't be reproduced, essentially. And that's of course what they're doing. They're artificially inseminating upon society these food shortages, both from the psychological aspect of telling people that there are food shortages to be had, whilst literally they are buying up all the farmland. As we know, people like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, these are just puppet characters, of course, in the greater scheme of things. But the oligarchy own most arable farmland, and consequently they can dictate the price of foods, and they can artificially inseminate shortages amongst every population around the world. And then that, combined with the fact that the GMO crops that they're producing can be altered to stimulate or destimulate, for lack of a better term, certain things. Yeah, it's completely fucked. It's the ultimate fuckery. But that is a system deriving from minority rule. When you've got a small group of people, a clique, and they have ultimate power because they literally produce capital themselves, you can dictate how the rest of society thinks, which they literally do. Most people are obviously retarded, and they just do whatever the news tells them to do.
Absolutely. So those seeds that you're talking about were actually developed about 20 years ago, and that was in the public domain by Monsanto, correct? And they were called like Terminator seeds. They were labeled like Terminator seeds because they literally, only produce one crop. And then on top of that, obviously, the actual, as we know, the actual crop that's produced from these seeds, obviously nutritionally devoid innately because it doesn't have the life force or the seed in it in order to reproduce itself, which means that it's less nutritious. It's not full. It's not like a full product because it doesn't have like the membrane in it, which is the seed. It's just like bananas that we get today are not the full product because they should have seeds in it. Seedless grapes, seedless anything that grows from a seed is going to be devoid. Funny enough, as well, something else that they mentioned in regards to like these food shortages, which I mean, I see the amount of shit that gets chucked. I see the amount of shit that I chuck away each week, and I just know that there's like, yeah, there's definitely enough to feed everybody. But
of course there is,
trying to engineer a climate as to why. But anyway, and it was just funny. It was just like fucking borderline hillbilly that's at the World Economic Forum. So obviously, as we know, the cabal has like they have people from black cab drivers to builders to judges. Like they literally go across all. Like, there's little crackheads who are related to these people, but somehow this guy managed to be at the World Economic Forum. He just seems like any fucking Texas businessman. There was nothing, particularly, distinguished about him, if for lack of a better term. And he was there talking about, but the war in Ukraine has had a big impact on like the global food chain supply because in Ukraine they made enough food to feed 400 million people. Really? Like really? So
well, actually, there's a couple of interesting things on that. The first thing being, of course, as we know, those in the public sphere, i.e., the brand, if you like, of the status quo, is intended to be mocking. So they always have people that are openly fucking retards, excuse my French, just to undermine every aspect of kind of authority or format or officialism or what is correct, the correct approach, if you like. Once you have people wearing dresses when they're dudes in fucking forums in the United Nations with their babies suckling on their wife's boob, it kind of undermines the purpose of the meeting in itself. And anything that they can do to make life as theatrical and ridiculous as possible is, of course, what we're going to sponsor. So whether he is just a shilly puppet that they've literally just played rock, paper, scissors amongst himself in the fucking fraternal club the night before, and he's been pulled out the hat, or if he's got some blood lineage that they've that connects him to the status quo. Either way, absolutely, it's totally fucking preposterous. And the other thing I was going to say literally just fucking slipped my mind. It was related to your last point, which was the grain supply. Well, Ukraine supposedly has for a very, very long time been one of the kind of, I guess, staple suppliers of world grain, I think. I believe, even though it's a relatively small landmass, I think it's always historically produced a sizable proportion of the world's grain, but I could be wrong on that. But either way, of course, we know that it's almost...
that probably is true officially.
But I mean, realistically, it's irrelevant anyway because there's enough landmass anywhere in the world to produce so much food to feed 20 times the number of people that exist on this planet.
Correct.
It's all just, again, it's all just a scheme. It's the historic classical scheme that's been utilized since day one. The media, whether in respect to physical newspapers or digital outlets or just, pastors, parishioners and spokespersons stood on fucking plinths in parks in 1750. It's all the same shit that they spew, which is what? Fear, 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 fear. That's how people retain division amongst themselves because they're always bickering over whatever the state tell them to bicker over. And because it's become so perpetual and so kind of distinct to the nature of modern society, people are bred literally into a system of fear. So all they see from day one when they're conceived, when they're birthed, is just a fucking CNN channel with some grey-haired wanker talking about how today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it's going to be China, Russia's the enemy, when realistically they're all the same fucking people. And most people can't even see this to this day, even though it can be, openly concluded through the most basic logical dissemination and dissection of anything. Anything, and people should be able to have the capacity to realize that 1 + 1 is not 5. But when it's with respect to fucking like, open pedophile fucking businessmen running the world, they seem to turn a blind eye to the fact, even if you've got a 70-year-old man literally fingering a child on TV, it's like, oh, it was just an accident. It was a mistake. He only fingered them 7 times. It's just fucking preposterous. But yeah, I'll try not to rant.
Yeah, no, exactly that. It's we're just like living in a world whereby, and on top of that, it's like they almost like kind of like, like the whole term about leading by example. And as a result, I think there are a lot of people who also know that, they live in like a world of fuckery, but they're just absolutely too spineless and they lack morality and integrity themselves. So it's just a case of, well, I'm all right, my family's all right. I get to go on 1 or 2 holidays a year while I work 60 hours a week, that's good enough for me. And in the meantime, those kids getting, bummed in the covens all up and down the country, or up and down the continent. The bombs getting dropped on certain countries, etc. Like we've literally, okay. I mean, we literally saw Button Moon, like India's Button Moon operation.
Oh my God, man! Yeah, and now Japan's at it as well. Have you heard? Oh, now Japan's going to be going to the moon. Oh yes, after all of these years of no one being able to go to the moon because no one's ever been to the fucking moon, all of a sudden everyone's going to the moon with their fucking, what is it, 240p TV angle on the supposed landing of the Indian spacecraft. It literally looks like an anime from 76.
Yeah,
it's fucking ridiculous, and people laugh it up.
Yeah. And also, so there was 2 rockets sent because there was already a probe there filming when it was landing. So
there we go.
Double thing, didn't they? Oh, it's fucking phenomenal. They're amazing. Amazing, those.
But this is the thing. This is what is really quite amazing about, again, whether we are placing it on people's inability to decipher logically, or calculate logically, or if it's because most people are spineless. It's a combination of many of those factors, no doubt. Yeah. Absolutely. But the basic premise of what is proclaimed to be science is that it's ever progressive or ever changing, for lack of a better term. So you take people 100 years ago that were inventing all kinds of things which at that period in history were, phenomenally advanced. Whether it's the printing press, whether it's the electric light bulb, all this kind of stuff. And yet at the same time, those people couldn't comprehend many of the things we have today. And yet people today, just like people back then, being unable to comprehend what we have, still think that what we're at is the absolute height and epitome of advancement, and that there's no more. And that when you say things like it's not possible to do this, or that's never been done, they're like, no, of course it has. Of course it has been done because we're told it has, because it's science. If there's no mental, without kind of making a tangent and not explaining it effectively, we've lost the capacity to reflect on our own proclaimed past, whether that's true or not, and utilize that knowledge and apply it to things like, well, how is it possible that people have been to the moon in late 1960s and no one's been back since, until supposedly India and Japan are now, fronting that absolute scam as we speak. The open things that are taught to these people through YouTube channels, whether they're shilly or not, that NASA doesn't have any photographs of the Earth. It's openly published on their fucking website. They don't have a single photograph of the Earth. They admit to it. People don't even believe that. You could literally direct them to NASA, a representative, many of whom have actually spoken about this. And people still don't buy it because they're unable, because it's kind of a Stockholm syndrome scenario, just like the COVID thing, where people actually believe that nations with different cultures and different political perspectives unanimously agreed, even though they were at war, supposedly, as we're told, like China, Russia, Iran, the United States, all at the same time, came to the conclusion that there was this pandemic, which we know now to be total bullshit, and that subsequently you need to inject yourself with something which logically would take 10 or so years to produce. When you calculate the number of factories, whatever you want to call them, medical institutes that can produce vaccines, it is impossible mathematically that they could have produced that number of vaccines in that period of time for the entire global population 5 or 6 times over, which is what they claim to have produced in that period in question. It's actually impossible. There aren't enough seconds in the fucking day to produce that many vaccines in that period of time to then supply to the global population 3 or 4 times over, which is the boosters plus the excess, plus, damage control and all these things. People can't even calculate basic math to undermine the premise supplied to them by an openly corrupt status quo that utilizes companies like Pfizer, who are all owned by the same people anyway. They're owned by Vanguard Group, who owns BlackRock unofficially, the biggest investment companies in the world. And they, in turn, are owned by the biggest financial organizations fronted by families like the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers, or the biggest investment companies of all time, and have openly been responsible for mass murder in West Africa, killing thousands of children. And yet people still buy their fucking products. People still take their kids to a clinic, line them up and say, here you go, David, why don't you inject yourself as my son or daughter with a fucking chemical that's been produced by a company that has openly killed thousands of people since their inception. That's how fucking stupid people are.
Absolutely. And just go back to something that you touched on earlier. It's like there are literally hardcore black and white receipts for every single thing that we're saying. It's not even hidden. It's actually not even.
But that's the term, isn't it? Hidden in plain sight. The open oxymoron. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so essentially, well, there's not really much good news here, because in a sense, it's like, basically we're doomed. However, there is well, at least that's what one would think. But I was reading a Telegraph. I was watching a video on the Telegraph channel on YouTube the other day about this. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's on the other side of the world, but there was this guy that escaped from Wandsworth prison, an alleged suspected, in quotation marks, terrorist. He was a 21-year-old. 21-year-old Daniel Khalif. He was on the run for 5 days. So, right, bear in mind, he escaped from Wandsworth prison, and he was arrested in Wandsworth 5 days later. And this is somebody who was in the army, who they said he could have been like a double agent, 21 years old, and like he wasn't even wearing a disguise. Like, I don't even know if he's a real person. I've not seen anything about his family or anything about his background. I've not seen any videos of any of his friends. But let's just say that he is a real person. I mean, why would that be national news? Like, the guy clearly shows us to be incompetent. But anyway, the thing that gave me hope in humanity is when I read the comments, it's like I was expecting to see all of this, flipping out, deport him, da 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 da, and all of this, even though he was British, but he was of some kind of like Middle Eastern ancestry. Everybody was just like, well, if this person was like serious or any kind of terrorist or like this skilled soldier, why has he been caught riding a bike through Wandsworth 4 days after the fact? And that's the bit that, so people have got like a bit of a Scooby-Doo, at times, but
but as we know, everything is pre-approved, isn't it? When it comes to media, there's no honest journalism anymore. Everything has to be stamped and processed by an editorial board that is provided by those that set the global narrative, whatever we want to call them. That's the way it works. So when you look at a story like that, for most people, it would seem to be pretty kind of of no object. It's a kind of an unnecessary thing to be flashing around the public eye. But what it does do is it furthers that fear, but from a different angle, because everything they do is pure military strategy. And this angle, for me, at least from my interpretation, would be they want to highlight that the prisons are failing, just as the food supply is failing, just as the political system is failing, just that everything is failing. That's another thing people have to worry about in the back of their minds, because of course even the dumbest individual still has a brain and the brain is the greatest supercomputer of all time, just because they don't know how to use it. The brain is still functioning and analyzing things at such a rate that whether consciously or not, is in the back of their mind. And then, of course, there's the other aspect which undermines the police, which is something that they've been trying to do for such a long time. We see it constantly in the United States, defund the police, this, that, and the next, which is, of course, what they're planning to do. They want to recreate anarchism and then format that under the guise of communism, which communism and capitalism is the same such thing. It's just that communism in essence is just like National Socialism, although branded as fascism by the kind of arbiters of history who have created these fictitious narratives to make it seem that communists and fascists are actually different when they're one and the same thing, because they're produced by capital, which derives from a centralized body, centralized banking system. But of course, communism for let's say the Soviet period was one of the most ingenious things. I mean, it was almost an experiment, just like COVID 2019, 2020, 2021. They're all demo run-throughs, albeit the Soviet period was a lengthy demo, something that people don't seem to understand, that the occultist families have been around for thousands of years and they don't have a time frame. These people build systems that they then apply 20, 30, 40, 50 years later that will last for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So for me, I look at the Soviet period as a simple demo that is now going to be reproduced, but in a cataclysmic formula where they can implement all other aspects that weren't feasible perhaps at that time, i.e. digital currency system being the prime factor of that. And of course, the technology that we now openly have available to us means that the mechanisms by which you can control and retain a social circle, society, whatever you want to call it, a social group or community within a set place indefinitely, potentially, is now totally up for grabs for them. And I think that's what we're seeing as well in desert cities, in places like Saudi Arabia. You've got the line, you've got the neon cities. Apparently they're building a huge one in Egypt as well. Essentially they're prisons. We're going to put people, which is what metropolises essentially are. Cosmopolitan areas were intended to bring people from the countryside, where they were self-sufficient and reliable on their own hand and their own labor, into a monetary system where they become completely inept without aid of government. It is a prison formula, and that's why they're building and reconstructing, or constructing, I should say, all of these cities out in the desert. The purpose is to relocate the vast majority of populations into an area where they have absolutely no hope, no inspiration, dead cities, just like what we see in Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Oman to this day, devoid of any personality. Characterless souls are consequently produced because the environment that shapes them is, without any effect. And that's what we're getting to, aren't we?
Absolutely. You can see it. They're building up, for lack of a better term, the East, and deconstructing the West. And obviously, with our knowledge on geoscience, let's say, we know, what most people see as East and West isn't what we see as East and West. But just for lack of a better term, if we go by the standardized map and shape of the earth, as is said. Another thing to touch on, for our viewers is I just had to ask them,
assuming we have viewers.
We'll cross our fingers. The 2 or 3 of you out there, whether you're our mates or not. I've just always wondered if anyone could ask what this miraculous force is that makes water kind of magnetic upside down and kind of like stick to things. Like, I've never known, I just don't know. Like, does water know what up and down is? Or I just wonder how water kind of sticks to soil.
That's a philosophical question as well, isn't it? What is up and down? What is down and up? What is water? I guess it could take so many lines, aside from the basic standardized scientific discernment of how things get to be. I don't know the answer. Is that for one of our 2 listeners or viewers out there?
Yeah, I mean, just
someone going to leave a comment.
Question. Just to help open people's minds. That's like the purpose of this, is to provoke thought, inspire truth, independent thinking, critical thinking, and for anybody who believes what they're told, that we live on the globe. Just what is that force that kind of keeps the water on this globe that we live on, this quote unquote globe we live on. You know, just yeah,
I can predict with a certainty at some point, assuming this video retains itself in the World Wide Web, the ether of the internet, there's going to be some sweaty man typing right now. You fucking think the world is fucking this and it should be this? Yeah. There's always going to be one of those guys. I can predict it with a certainty.
And it'll probably post a video from like Neil deGrasse Tyson or something.
Oh God, that guy needs an absolute slap. Just one of the many shills in those covens we referenced earlier, with a group of 9-year-old kids in fucking BDSM chains. These people are literally disgusting. Like, and the thing is, they again, as we were speaking about in terms of the theatrical element that's always applied. Yeah, they're so clearly shills. Like, they're not even. It's not like an old guy in a fucking somewhat scruffy professor's, tweed suit thing that you'd expect being portrayed in the average 60s movie when they reference university. It's a fucking guy that looks like he's wearing about a pound of makeup, spends about 3 hours doing his hair, and couldn't look more like a pedophile if he tried to. I mean, Jesus Christ, people like Jimmy Savile, they look like pedophiles. Like, this is a rule that I concluded when I was younger. If someone looks like a fucking weirdo, they're usually a fucking weirdo.
Yeah,
they are.
Absolutely.
Like 99% of the time, someone looks like a child molester or a pedophile. I'd put money on them being a child molester or a pedophile. And look what happened. People like Jimmy Savile turn out to be fucking serial pedos. And it's preposterous. It's preposterous. People's inability to decipher what's in front of them, I guess, is the greatest issue at hand. The debate question, whatever one wants to, refer to it as, is why are people incapable of seeing things for what they are, especially when things are often so simplistic, so clearly visible, even to the untrained eye, so to speak. It's just, why is that eye incapable of training itself? But I guess that would relate to what we were talking about earlier. The foods are poison. People don't have any.
Exactly.
Everything is just pure poison. And speaking of poison and stuff, by the way, because I don't think I've conversed this with you or talked about this with you since I got. Remember I was switched a long time ago. Obviously, I haven't used fluoride in years, but then I was using non-fluoride toothpaste, and I couldn't actually find any. I think it was in Bolivia. I couldn't find any. So I've been using sea salt, and it's perfect. Works perfectly. Just brushing your teeth with sea salt every morning, every night, as you would ordinarily do with toothpaste.
So you just works perfectly. Brush, dip it in the sea salt, and off you go.
No, I don't even wet it. Actually, originally, I just put the dry brush in the sea salt, and then it automatically turns into a paste when it's in your mouth, and then the toothbrush is damp, so that when you dip it back in the second time, it's more moist, and also you kind of want a little bit. They say I don't know who they are, but the internet bloggers of alternative medicine and all that kind of stuff, they say you got to be a bit careful with how much you put on, especially depending on the consistency and the grain of the salt itself, because it could potentially erode the enamel. But as far as I'm concerned, I haven't had that issue now. Just a modest amount. The first dry run, let's say, pun intended, is that a pun? I don't know. It is to get the top layer of plaque or whatever off your teeth. So it's kind of good that the first layer is dry before the following ones are moist. Anyway, point is, there's that, and then deodorant as well. I've been using that crystal deodorant, and you find when you come off the standard deodorants, even if they're organic or brand is organic, they're all owned by the same people. You usually smell a bit when for a few weeks, even using the natural stuff, but then that all goes away, and now there's none of that. Like, the crystal deodorant really works. After a month, it doesn't, there's nothing. So all that chemical crap that's on your skin is it's kind of like
out, and that's what's causing the bad smell.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So all of these products now are just completely natural, and I'm totally content with them. They're so simple to use. There's not the worry in the back of your mind that you're flushing all kinds of problematic forces into your system that are no doubt destroying your brain. Because let's look at people as a reflection, and they're all using Colgate and bloody mainstream products, and they're clearly, it's not working for them, is it? Mentally speaking, at least, and physically. But anyway, tangent aside.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, what have you been up to this weekend then? As a
this weekend just gone on the Friday, I met my German mate in Hackney Wick, and we went to this strange little bar called Grow. And yeah, I was there till about 2:30, 3 in the morning. Came home, worked out on Saturday, met some friends on Saturday evening, had a few more drinks. In fact, a few more drinks. That and that carried. I got home at probably about 6:30 in the morning.
What drinks? What
So I'd
gin and
start
tonics,
off with
beers, mix of everything.
Start off with beers. There's this like mango beer. It's like got like a slight that I had. It's like 4.1%. I had a couple of IPAs as well, because that's just my sort of thing. And then moved on to the gin and tonics and vodkas later on in the night. And yeah, that was that. Got home at about 6:30. Woke up at 10:30. Had a 4-hour sleep, but that felt like enough. Caught up on some things, watched some stuff that I'd missed, watched a few things I subscribed to, etc. Caught up on a few sport results, and then I actually played football for an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow. That is impressive.
In sweltering heat. It was probably about 27 Celsius. And I was expecting my legs to feel really heavy yesterday, and they didn't. They felt absolutely fine. But I told you about this new regimen I've been doing with this 55-year-old guy. We've been skipping for half an hour minimum and doing all the squats. And there's a magic to that, because I just feel more, energetic than ever. And exercises that normally hurt me aren't hurting me as much. So,
is this more cardio than ordinarily
cardio
you would do?
Yeah, absolutely. Although the body exercises and cardio, it's the squats. I mean, I don't normally do like body squats, but we did like 230 minutes of skipping Sunday before last. And the Sunday before this one, we did 34 minutes of skipping and 300 squats. So naturally, I just thought to myself, well, if you do 200 squats and your legs hurt for 4 days, if you do 300 squats, they're probably gonna hurt for at least 5. But no, the pain did not even get to as bad as it was with the 200. It's amazing. It's some kind of strange conditioning. I'm just wondering, is it that the body tells itself to produce less lactic acid because of the trauma you put it through recently? It's like, okay, you've done this to yourself. In case you do this again, we're going to regulate lactic acid release. Or it's bizarre. I'm trying to work that one out, because I understand if I did the same thing again, maybe not feeling as much, but I did more, and I wasn't like preparing myself for that like during the week, but like doing like say 20 minutes of skipping or something. Yeah, it's bizarre, but yeah, I love what the human body can do.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what it boils down to. I was just gonna say, like, I don't know much about really nutrition or kind of sports science, but for sure everything is a derivative of what runs us both mentally and physically, and which we don't really understand even a fraction of to this day, even though people seem to think they've mastered science.
Exactly.
It's like, it's one of those things, you run a race and you can be super fit, but it's always the first, if it's a marathon, the first couple of miles, maybe the first 20% of that race, that's the most brutal. I guess part of that is the psychological aspect. You've got to get yourself into a mental routine, and when you've just started the race, you're kind of a bit more all over the place, and until you get into that rhythm, things seem more difficult. But also at the same time, going back to what you said about the physical, I mean, there's been instances where I've run like fucking 20, 25Ks or something like that, and it hasn't felt as bad as perhaps, a 2-3 mile run.
Yeah.
I guess, the chemicals that the body releases, the endorphins, the testosterone, all this kind of stuff, it's all playing its role in ways that we can't fully grasp. Everything is complementing each other, and everything is having an effect on other aspects within the biological system that have yet to be discovered, let's say. So I guess, yeah.
Another question I've been pondering. You did a 5 5-day hike recently, or was it a 4-day hike?
It was 5 days in the end, 4 nights,
Right.
but it could have been done in two. But I was with a group, so we were chilling a little bit more than ordinarily we would. You know, a few drinks. We had carrying up like woks and food and stuff. So, I mean, like, yeah, but you know, it's one of those things. If you wanted to do it hardcore, yeah, 2 days is possible. I've met people that have done it in just over one. Um, but yeah, like that was pretty brutal, I have to say. That was in Chocky Corral, which is a kind of like. By the way, speaking of Chocky Corral, I've uploaded video for any of our inclined viewers or listeners that may want to check out some alternative history, perhaps if we can call it that. I upload stuff to BitChute, but I uploaded a lot of stuff to both YouTube and some alternative sources with respect to this place because it's again branded as a alternative Machu Picchu, and it is more scenic. There's no tourists there. There's like 20 people, so we actually get up to the trail. Yeah, it's more kind of refreshing, let's say. But you know, when you start to realise that everything is just restored to the point where there's no true age to these things that they're branding as being, you know, X number of thousand years old or
Absolutely.
whatever. It's all just brand spanking new. Literally, just it's preposterous. And you know, if the environment wasn't so pleasant, I would have been quite disappointed with the trek as a whole. But thankfully, at least the nature's always on offer to give you something. I am going to say that I can hear the phone going a little bit, so maybe we should wrap it up because I think when recording through this Skype device, the way it works the memory on the phone or I don't know the system specs, at least on this device, I'm not sure it can handle it because I can feel it's starting to get laggy. So should we wrap podcast one up,
Yeah.
James?
Yep. Episode 0.1. Absolutely.
0.0.1, many tens of thousands of clips to come, no doubt, before, although
Absolutely.
maybe we'll get banned eventually, no doubt. Probably after this one, YouTube will flag us and close my channel down. All the
Yeah.
good stuff that you know gives credence and precedence to what it is you're saying. If you get censored, you know there's validity in it.
Yeah.
So we can hope
Absolutely.
for that. But yeah, I guess
Absolutely.
we'll try a second one soon enough, I guess. And I'll do a little bit more research on Skype, and hopefully we've got something to entertain our 2.5 listeners with, which is Barry, Gaz,
And
and
his
little
dog.
Jeremy and his dog. That's the 2.5. Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. Well, I guess I'll speak to you later.
All right, cool. Ciao for now. Adios.
In a bit. Bye.
Yeah.